This Egyptian blood expert is dissecting a mummy. At the moment he makes the incision, a swarm of unidentified insects bursts out. Initially, the expert didn't take this matter seriously.
كل اللي كانوا معاك النهارده في أوضة التشريح. تعيش أنت.
This strange virus began to spread rapidly. Various supernatural events and terrifying rumors constantly plagued this hematologist. As a staunch atheist, can he uncover the truth of the matter? Welcome to the latest fantasy drama, Paranormal. In the 1960s, hematologist Dr. Rafat taught at a university. He played maze games in class when someone accidentally knocked over his coffee. Such unfortunate little incidents often happened to him. For example, Rafat hated eating fennel. Yet every time, he would eat the only fennel seed in the pot. Whenever he walked under trees, he would inevitably get hit by bird droppings. Even the lamp at home would inexplicably burst. Despite all this, Rafat didn't believe in curses, let alone superstitions. He thought these incidents merely validated Murphy's Law. Always prepare for the worst, because it will definitely happen. Rafat's life was the best proof of this law. He was a firm atheist, believing that supernatural events didn't exist. It was Rafat's 40th birthday. He put on his most expensive suit from the wardrobe to prepare for dinner at his older sister Layla's house. Unexpectedly, his friend Maggie showed up at his door. Rafat had always had a crush on her. Hearing that she was staying in Egypt to teach after her divorce, he couldn't help but invite Maggie to join him at his sister's house. Little did he know that his cousin would also be present at the gathering. The family saw that Rafat was not young anymore, and had been trying to pressure him into marrying his cousin soon. Once the family members had gathered, Rafat appeared with Maggie in front of everyone. Layla immediately became vigilant. Upon seeing the unfamiliar woman, fearing that she might disrupt the marriage she was trying to arrange, Rafat could only change the subject and introduce the people at the table. They were his sister Layla, her husband Tullet, as well as his older brother Rida, who wore a felt hat, and Tullet's brother Medat and his wife Ilham. Finally, Rafat introduced his cousin as his fiancée. When it was time to eat, Rafat took his first bite of fried rice and found fennel. Feeling down, he went to the balcony to smoke, but he realized he had forgotten to bring his cigarette pack. Rafat took out half a rial and asked his sister's son Taha to go downstairs to buy a pack of cigarettes. When he returned to the dining table, the family began talking about Rafat's childhood again. They even mentioned his first love, Sarah. She was the girl Rafat met while playing hide-and-seek. Sarah lived in the Al Taqadran mansion. Adults generally didn't allow children to go near that big house, but Rafat immediately liked Sarah at first sight, and even took Layla and the others inside to visit. Sarah's house was very strange. The adults ignored the presence of the children. Instead, Sarah brought over a cart to serve them a blue drink. In the afternoon, several children played hide-and-seek together. Every time, Rafat couldn't catch anyone and was laughed at by everyone. Sarah would deliberately hide in obvious places, so that Rafat could at least catch her. She was so understanding that Rafat was deeply moved and decided to confess his feelings. When Sarah heard his confession, she laughed uncontrollably and ran to tell Layla and the others, laughing together at Rafat's confession. Gradually, Layla and the others thought Sarah was a weirdo and were unwilling to continue playing with her. Only Rafat held no grudges.
هنلعب لعبة هتخليك معايا على طول. استغمية؟ حاجة زي كده.
As Rafat counted down to end the game, he prepared to find someone, but he found the entire mansion had become dilapidated, as if no one had lived there for a long time. Suddenly, a woman's scream came from the second floor. Rafat cautiously went upstairs to check, and discovered that the lady of the house was in labor. Meanwhile, Layla was very worried about Rafat after returning home, and called her brother Rida to go back to the mansion to find him. However, the outside of the villa had also become very run down. The front door was unexpectedly locked. At the same time, Rafat was lured by Shiraz, and climbed to the top floor of the building.
لو نطيت وبقيت معايا هنا مش هنشوفهم تاني وهنبقى مع بعض.
Rida saw his brother standing on the rooftop, and hurriedly shouted in alarm. Just then, an air raid siren suddenly interrupted Rafat's memories. The family hurried downstairs to seek shelter, but Taha, who went to buy cigarettes, had not returned. Rida, worried that something had happened to the boy, immediately went to the store to look for him. Meanwhile, Layla heard noises from upstairs, and called a few men to go check it out. What if Taha had come back? Rafat searched around the house, but unexpectedly, Maggie followed him. She probably didn't want to be alone with strangers. The two hurried to check when they heard a noise from the rooftop. only to see Taha standing at the edge of the rooftop, just like Rafat did back then. Raida, downstairs, also witnessed this scene. He felt as if he had returned to decades ago, when Rafat, unable to resist temptation, jumped toward Sira. If Raida hadn't caught him, Rafat would have fallen to his death long ago, but Raida was left with a disability because of it. Fortunately, this time Rafat saved Taha. The stone wall on the rooftop had the word death written on it. Rafat couldn't help but remember what Raida had said before. There had been a fire at the Al Takadran mansion, and since then, all the residents who moved in would meet a tragic end. Some committed suicide, others burned to death, and there were even mothers who killed their own children. At that time, Raida made his brother swear to never go near that house again, and so, Sira gradually faded from Rafat's life. At this moment, the air raid siren ended. Taha was scolded for climbing the building without permission, and his mother didn't listen to his explanations at all. Taha could only secretly tell Rafat that he had seen a peculiar girl who wore a white dress and smiled like a demon. Rafat immediately guessed that this girl was Sira. He reassured Taha not to be afraid. "I can see things that others can't, too. For example, there's a demon sitting next to the dressing table, and on one side of the shelf, there's a slender-legged creature. As for the girl in the white dress, she's hiding behind the curtains, but I don't see them with my eyes. I see them with my mind. As we all know, the mind has no sight. So these are all non-existent, illusory things. You don't need to be afraid of them." After dinner, Rafat drove Maggie home. She was very curious about the story of Sira. Rafat replied that it was just a distorted rumor, as it had been passed down orally over the years, with the fabricated parts long replacing the real memories. Childhood memories were hazy and unclear. He didn't believe he had encountered a ghostly woman. Rafat returned to his apartment feeling exhausted. Unexpectedly, the lights in the house malfunctioned again. A glass also shattered for no apparent reason. Sira crawled around beneath his bed.
قانون رفعت رقم 5. لو عقلك لعبك خده على قد عقله. انت مش موجودة يا شيراز.
The next day, Rafat received orders from senior government officials to dissect a newly unearthed mummy. He fully equipped himself and walked into the operating room. Just as he made an incision on the body, a swarm of bugs flew out. One even crawled into Rafat's cigarette pack. This dissection had to be temporarily halted. Rafat went to see his sister at noon. She was burning things at home, saying it was to exorcise Taha. Layla warned Rafat to wear his engagement ring today and take his cousin to watch a movie. Rafat could only comply. In the evening, he drove to the cinema. Rafat casually took the cigarette pack and put it in his pocket. In the screening room, it was just him and his cousin. Rafat was distracted throughout the movie. Suddenly, his cousin mentioned that while working during the day, she had seen the ghost of Sira. Rafat dismissed it as her fanciful thinking and didn't take it seriously. After the movie, he drove his cousin home. His cousin insisted that Rafat not escort her upstairs. Unexpectedly, the hallway lights went out. Looking at the dark building, she felt a surge of fear, and quickly left the apartment. She ran frantically to a nearby newsstand, hoping to borrow the owner's phone, but the newsstand's phone was disconnected. The cousin ran to seek refuge with Rafat. Unexpectedly, before she could even reach the stairs, Sira blocked her way. On the other side, Rafat had just arrived home, to find his colleague from the lab waiting at the door.
كل اللي كانوا معاك النهارده في اوضه التشريح. تعيش انت.
Rafat initially wanted to send his colleague Jack away, but when he opened the door, he saw the word death written on the dining room wall. He quickly called Jack back, to question him if he had seen anyone enter his house. Jack replied with a non sequitur, saying that the mummy was the Black Pharaoh Neferurker 7. It was said that he killed his beloved brother, to take the throne and his brother's lover, causing the girl who was taken away to die with resentment. As a result, the Egyptians called her Kasila, meaning Mother of Sorrows. The Black Pharaoh felt the hatred people had for him, and feared retribution after death. So he placed a curse on anyone who attempted to desecrate his tomb, promising to kill all who defied him. Jack believed that the pharaoh must be reburied, to escape the terrible curse. After saying this, Jack took out a forked bell from his bag, which had inscriptions of the spells of Hathor and the Eye of Horus, capable of dispelling evil and protecting lives. Before Rafat could respond, a sudden scream from downstairs pierced the air. The two rushed downstairs to find her collapsed on the floor. They quickly took her to the hospital. Rafat suspected she had disseminated intravascular coagulation. At this moment, patients were continuously flooding into the hospital, and by the middle of the night, it was crowded with people.
الوباء بيزيد يا رفعت.
Maggie heard about the situation and rushed over immediately. She examined her cousin's symptoms and confirmed that it was not related to the plague. Jack pointed out that the cousin's condition was similar to that of the doctors in the dissection room. But how did she get infected? Rafat immediately thought of that pack of cigarettes he had brought from the lab. Sure enough, he found a beetle inside. The three of them quickly headed to the dissection room, hoping to bury the mummy quickly. Rafat was familiar with the person on duty, so he casually made up an excuse to send him away. Then he called Jack to help lift the mummy onto the car. Rafat carefully examined the body and believed it was not the Black Pharaoh, but the unfortunate prince who had been usurped. This was because the body was missing a leg. It was said that the Black Pharaoh's brother, Prince Neferkahu, fell in love with a foreign woman, but due to court rules, he couldn't marry her. To escape the family marriage arrangements, Prince Neferkahu chose to go out to battle. Unfortunately, he was injured on the battlefield and had to amputate a leg. When Prince Neferkahu returned home with a wooden prosthetic leg, he discovered that his brother had usurped the throne and married his beloved. If this mummy was that limping prince, then why would he cause a plague? Jack recalled the records on papyrus, which said that the limping prince's lover, Queen Kasila, had written an elegy after his death. Under the protection of the gods Ammonius and Maat, until fate brings me back together with my love, the evil in the world will dissipate. Could it be that to prevent disaster, they needed to reunite this doomed couple? Rafat immediately took the mummy to the temple. As Queen Kasila was buried there, the temple was like a labyrinth. The three of them planned to split up to find the queen's coffin. Rafat carried the mummy through a narrow stone passage. To his surprise, he actually saw Queen Kasila. Rafat placed the two bodies together, and an invisible black shadow instantly dissipated. The plague in the city also vanished along with it. However, his cousin's condition didn't improve. Due to this incident, Rafat made a firm decision to give up his feelings for Maggie. He would marry his cousin as soon as she woke up. As his cousin continued to show no signs of improvement, Rafat planned to go to Tripoli for a hematology conference, hoping to find a way to cure his cousin. Since the university required Maggie to attend the conference as well, they traveled together. They soon arrived at the conference venue. The speaker, Lewis, mentioned a plant called rosinweed that could treat diseases caused by coagulopathy, but this plant was already extinct. After the meeting, Lewis handed Rafat a new map of a labyrinth. They had been playing maze games together since their university days. The maze at the beginning of the film was also sent to Rafat by Lewis. Lewis knew that Rafat's fiancée desperately needed the rosinweed to save her life, so he inquired through various sources and learned about the Tuareg tribe, where they might still find this plant. However, the journey was perilous, and success wasn't guaranteed. The three of them hired a local guide and set off immediately. Unfortunately, halfway there, the guide refused to continue. The three had to get out on their own and keep moving toward the unknown territory. In the evening, Lewis lit a campfire to rest for a while. He took out a tarot deck to pass the time. Rafat looked down on divination, believing it was nothing more than the Barnum effect. A fortune teller would just say things that anyone could relate to in general terms. Lewis didn't argue with Rafat, but continued to examine his tarot cards. Suddenly, a group of Tuareg tribespeople surrounded them. Lewis and Rafat hurriedly explained their intentions, but the native tribespeople claimed that the rosinweed had long been extinct. "You must leave the desert by tomorrow, or else don't blame us for being unfriendly." Just as Rafat felt disappointed, a tribesman named Eldon turned back. He said, "I have what you want. Meet me at the foot of the mountain in the morning, and I will help guide you." The three of them set off to the foot of the mountain. Eldon wouldn't help for free, and he asked Rafat for all the cash he had on him. He explained that the rosinweed was in a nearby cave. The tribespeople claimed it was extinct, because everyone feared the guardian of the cave. The guardian was not human, and no one knew what it looked like. Soon, the four of them arrived at a cave entrance. Eldon said that without the guardian's permission, no one could enter casually. He led Lewis and Rafat to kneel and pray, hoping the guardian would allow them passage. However, Rafat used explosives to blow open the entrance. Then he walked into the cave. Maggie and Lewis followed him inside. The three split up to search for the rosinweed. Eldon felt they had offended the guardian and got up to flee. At this moment, Maggie discovered a corpse in the cave and screamed in fright. The three failed to find the rosinweed and had to leave. To their surprise, there were giant footprints at the cave entrance. Eldon's torn body lay nearby. Lewis sensed the situation was wrong and quickly led Rafat and Maggie to leave. In the evening, while they were resting, they heard a beast roar. so they focused on the source of the sound. To their shock, they saw a massive gorilla. The three of them hurriedly fled in fear. Unluckily, Rafat stepped into quicksand and instantly froze in place, unable to move. Meanwhile, the gorilla jumped down from the sand slope and also got stuck in the quicksand with a dive. As it struggled wildly, it sank deeper and deeper. Rafat returned to the cave to search again. Unexpectedly, they saw chaotic footprints along the way. Behind the sand slope were countless corpses. Only one old man was still gasping for breath. At this moment, Rafat saw Syrah. He followed her guidance back to the cave. Sure enough, he found the rosin weed. Rafat took the herbs and set the explosives. Maggie suddenly approached. He hurriedly stomped out the fuse, worried that the explosion might hurt Maggie, but the other end of the fuse was still burning. Rafat searched everywhere for Maggie. He unexpectedly heard the whimper of a small creature. He dug through the rocks and found a baby gorilla hidden inside. The guardian wasn't protecting the rosin weed, but its own child. At this moment, Maggie was grabbed by the gorilla. Fortunately, Rafat arrived just in time, placing the baby in front of the gorilla. The gorilla picked up its son and left the cave. Rafat also pulled Maggie out.
What, dynamite?
Luckily, they ran fast and were not harmed. Before leaving, Louis gave Rafat one last tarot reading. The card revealed that he would lose a loved one. The flight time was approaching, and Rafat had no time to ask more questions. He hurriedly grabbed the tarot card and left. After returning, he had the doctor inject his cousin with pollen. By morning, she had regained consciousness, but Rafat still broke his promise and chose to abandon the engagement. The next day, he received a call from his sister-in-law back home. She was crying on the other end, but Rafat guessed that something had happened to his mother. Could it be that the loved one in Louis's prediction was referring to his mother? He rushed back to the village without stopping. On the way, he passed the Al-Takadran mansion, having heard that a man had bought the house and was planning to demolish the entire building. After returning home, his mother was unharmed. Instead, his brother Rita was in a dazed state, repeatedly banging his head against the wall. Everyone said he had been taken by a demon. Rafat immediately went to the village clinic to get some anticonvulsants, sedatives, and syringes needed for blood sampling. The village doctor asked in response, "Are you here for your brother's illness?" I examined him, and there's nothing wrong. Rita's condition is simply due to being summoned by a demon. After saying this, the doctor pulled out a booklet, which recorded all the victims summoned by the demon. These people would see certain hallucinations and insist that they heard a lady calling them. Although Rafat had experienced supernatural events, he still believed that demons didn't exist. He grabbed the necessary medications and prepared to leave, but the doctor kept following him, chattering on. Some say the demon is a man-eater who can disguise herself as a beautiful woman to lure humans by the riverbank. During the first summoning, she uses a soft voice to tempt you to approach her. By the second summoning, you become agitated, and by the third, no one can understand what you say. After that, no matter what happens, nothing can stop you from going to see her. When Rafat returned home, he sought his sister-in-law finding a chief to help Rita with an exorcism ceremony. Angry, Rafat kicked them out of the house, and then drew a vial of blood from his brother. He had Layla take it to a hospital in Cairo for testing. Rafat believed that the legends about the demon were the work of that chief. They must have drugged the victims to pretend to display their exorcism abilities. Rafat had the doctor lead the way to the riverbank, where the demon was said to appear. During this time, the doctor mentioned that the chief's method of treating patients was to insert heated iron rods into their ears to block the demon's voice. Rafat was very angry upon hearing this. The three of them stood by the river with kerosene lamps, ready to catch the demon as soon as she appeared. If the demon didn't come to summon them, then it would mean this was all a fabrication. Just as he finished speaking, Rafat heard someone calling his name. He immediately took the lamp and dashed into the cornfield. Following the sound downriver, Rafat saw a beautiful woman in a white dress standing in the river. Wasn't this the chief's female assistant? Before Rafat could say anything, he was knocked unconscious. Everyone thought he had also heard the call and would soon fall ill, so they tied Rafat to a chair. Maggie followed the doctor back to the clinic to help him get some sedatives. Meanwhile, Rafat was tied up with his brother. Rita kept mumbling that they were reaching the end. Rafat urged his brother to wake up a bit, saying that this was all a trick set up by the chief. Can you not be so ignorant? Rita felt very hurt after hearing this. I broke my leg to save you, and stayed in the village to farm so you could go to school. When you burned down the entire crop as a child, it was because I was worried you were too weak to endure the beatings, and willingly took the punishment for you. Now you say I am ignorant? Rafat explained that he didn't burn the crops. Dad made you work in the fields, because you were the strongest child. And I am weak and sickly, only loving to study. Dad's only love is you. Rita replied, you are just deceiving yourself like this, to escape your guilt. Just as the two brothers were arguing, their sister-in-law came in with a red-hot iron rod, ready to follow the chief's orders, and poke it into her husband's ear. Rafat quickly pretended to be possessed, and urged his sister-in-law to stab her own ear first. When she got closer, he broke free from the ropes and pinned her down, tying her to the chair instead. Rafat grabbed an axe and went to find the chief, accusing him and his female assistant of pretending to be a demon to deceive people. The chief immediately pulled out a pistol, holding his assistant by the cheeks, saying, "This is a mute girl without a tongue. How could she possibly speak? I'll give you 3 seconds to get the hell out of here." Rafat, wary of the gun, could only back away from the door. Suddenly, the assistant knocked the chief unconscious from behind. She led Rafat to the thatched hut, where a sleazy burly man was tied up. The mute girl broke the man's fingers, forcing him to reveal the truth. It turned out that the chief had twin daughters. The mute girl's sister, Tessa, had been raped by this scoundrel. The chief not only didn't comfort her daughter, but also felt that she was a disgrace to the family, and wanted to kill Tessa. The poor girl ran all the way to the riverbank, only to be cruelly murdered, and discarded by the chief beneath the water. Since then, her ghost has been calling out the names of men. To protect this secret, the chief also cut off the younger daughter's tongue. Rafat didn't believe that ghosts truly existed. He quickly left the chief's house. As he walked into the cornfield, he heard the call of the demon again. This time, Rafat didn't hesitate. He took off his jacket and jumped into the river to investigate. Meanwhile, his cousin, worried about Rafat's safety, rushed to the village overnight. She saw her sister-in-law tied to a chair, and hurriedly went to untie her. But unexpectedly, her sister-in-law suddenly froze in place, and slammed against the wall. Rita tried to speak but couldn't get the words out. When he turned his head, he saw Shiraz standing by the bed. At this moment, Rita vanished without a trace. On the other side, Rafat dug underwater and indeed found a corpse. He pulled the skeleton upward, but suddenly his body cramped up, and he was about to drown. Rita jumped into the river and pushed him up, but gradually sank to the riverbed himself. In the end, Lewis's prophecy came true. Rafat lost a loved one. The case of the chief's brutal murder of his daughter was exposed, and the police had arrested him. The next day, Rafat stood before his brother's grave, and finally admitted to having burned the crops as a child. He was indeed a selfish and cowardly person, who always brought trouble to those around him. After Rita's death, the apparition of Shiraz also vanished. Rafat hadn't seen her for some time. In the trash can lay the tarot card Lewis had given him, which featured the High Priestess, representing dreams and the subconscious. Rafat had been dreaming frequently lately, but found it hard to remember the content of his dreams. The doctor was an expert in dream studies. He advised Rafat to go to bed every night at the same time, and preferably not set any alarms. He suggested placing a notebook by the bedside, to immediately write down the dream's content upon waking. When you compare the recorded dreams with real life, your brain will start to comprehend your subconscious. Then you can enter the lucid dreaming stage. Once you learn to decode your subconscious, you can dream whatever you wish. In the evening, Rafat went to bed early, and kept murmuring Shiraz's name, hoping to find her in a dream and ask her clearly. After falling asleep, he entered a pitch-black house. Shiraz stood in the hallway, but no matter how hard Rafat tried, he couldn't catch up to her. Then, a pitch-black monster appeared, chasing Rafat until he woke up from the dream. Just then, Maggie came to visit, and Rafat asked her to wait a moment. He quickly jotted down the details of his recent dream in the notebook. Rafat remembered feeling a tremendous pressure on his chest, while running in the dream. It wasn't until he felt a key that things started to improve slightly. At this moment, Rafat just wanted to solve the issue of his dreams. He impatiently sent Maggie away. Rafat checked his pajama pocket, and was surprised to actually find a key. Rafat tried it in every lock in the house, but none of them matched. He quickly called the doctor to describe his situation. After listening to him, the doctor believed Rafat had encountered a nightmare demon. The nightmare demon is a legendary creature with many forms. It is said to be the guardian of the dark world. protecting the underworld where demons reside from mortal intrusion. Most people who encounter it will experience a condition known as sleep paralysis. They feel awake, but seem to be suppressed by something in the dream. Of course, there's also the possibility of ordinary sleepwalking. The doctor suggested that he sprinkle some flour by his bed before sleeping. If he wakes up to find footprints by the bed, it would mean he had sleepwalked. After returning home, Rafat followed the advice. This time, the dream was different. He dreamed of a child he couldn't heal during his internship. Rafat wanted to make amends for his past mistakes, but unexpectedly, the monster reappeared. He hurried to the end and pulled open the door to escape, but accidentally yanked off the doorknob. Rafat rushed behind the door and saw the burning crops and his brother Rida. At this moment, his pet cat jumped onto Rafat's bedside. It also entered his dream. Rafat ran frantically to shake off the monster, when suddenly his pet cat dashed out and stood in front of the monster. Rafat woke up in an instant. He felt the doorknob in his pocket, then looked under the bed, and indeed found messy footprints and the dead cat. Could it be that the nightmare demon killed it? Rafat buried the kitten and hurried to find the doctor. The doctor pulled out a dream interpretation guide from the library. It stated that creatures killed by the nightmare demon would also die in reality. To eliminate the nightmare demon, it must be killed. Otherwise, it would continue its killing spree. The nightmare demon would only leave after killing a human. That night, Rafat went to sleep, filled with dread. He entered a dark room from the cornfield, which was piled high with corpses. Just as Rafat was bewildered, a vertical ladder fell from above. He immediately grabbed the ladder and climbed up, unable to resist looking down. To his surprise, the mountain of corpses transformed into a maze game he often played. Just as he was about to turn back and continue climbing, the monster kicked him away. Rafat woke up feeling excruciating pain and found bruises on his chest. He felt he could no longer afford to sleep, or he would surely die in the dream. So far, the contents of the dreams were all things that make Rafat felt scared or guilty. He decided to return to the Cardlow mansion in search of answers. Unexpectedly, an old man emerged with a gun. Rafat explained that he needed to go inside to find out about Syrah.
انت بتشوفها في الحلم
في الحقيقة
انت ميت ما حدش شافها في الحلم الا ومات.
With no choice, Rafat had to turn back. The brain can only last about 11 hours without sleep at most. Sleep deprivation can lead to hallucinations and auditory illusions, and even sensory disorientation. He didn't know how much longer he could hold on. Rafat tirelessly studied his notes, and finally thought of a solution. He had previously told his nephew, "When your mind tries to deceive you, go along with it." Now Rafat realized another possibility. When your mind tries to deceive you, find a way to outsmart it. Rafat's mind was like a maze. Why couldn't he trap the nightmare demon in his subconscious? Rafat swallowed some pills and prepared his tools to enter a lucid dreaming state. He awakened the dead to serve him, and then extinguished the flames in the fields to save his brother. Just as the plan was about to succeed, the Lifa couple and his cousin suddenly showed up. They saw sleeping pills scattered by the bed, and there were ropes and an axe beside Rafat. They were startled. The three of them took the axe from the bed, and the Rafat in the dream lost his weapon too. Moreover, after Lifa and the others touched his body, they were pulled into the dream as well. Rafat grabbed the two and ran out of the mansion. But unfortunately, the brother-in-law also entered the dream, and was killed by Syrah. With the humans' tragic deaths, the nightmare demon dissipated. The next day, Rafat ran back to the Cardlow mansion with his tools, only to discover that the new owner had committed suicide, and had left the property to Rafat. Inside was a document that told the story of this new owner. His name was Rahim. In 1910, he came to the Cardlow mansion with his mother, to work at the Cardlow estate. Mr. Cardlow had simple requirements of them. As long as they didn't make noise, it was fine. However, Rahim quickly noticed that there were always strange banging sounds in the villa, and they could last for most of the day. That night, he was awakened again by the strange noises. Rahim quietly got up to observe his surroundings, and saw the butler sneaking around in front of the chimney. After the butler left, he carefully walked over, and lifted the debris and blankets under the chimney. To his surprise, there was a hidden room underground.
أنا شيراز تحب تلعب معايا؟
Rahim was startled and quickly covered the blankets back up. The next day, he eavesdropped on the maid's conversation, and guessed that Syrah was Mr. Cardlow's granddaughter. Her daughter, Nagiz, had an illegitimate child, and was abandoned by a scoundrel. To protect his daughter's reputation, Mr. Cardlow had to lock his granddaughter in the basement, treating the child as if she didn't exist. If Sarah wanted to eat or had any other requests, she only had to knock on the wall. The two children, lacking companions, gradually became good friends. Sarah longed to leave the basement to see the outside world, and Rahim was willing to do anything to save his friend. One night, he intentionally shattered a candlestick to ignite a flame. Their thought process was simple. If the house caught fire, the adults would surely not allow Sarah to be burned alive. Unfortunately, Rahim underestimated how cruel Mr. Cardlow could be. The master and the maids all escaped from the villa. Rahim was also pulled into the yard by his mother. Mr. Cardlow held his daughter tightly, preventing her from going back to save anyone. Sarah perished in the sea of flames just like that. As Rahim grew up, he lived frugally all his life, just to buy this house and bury her. But after acquiring the house, Rahim discovered that there was no basement at all. Perhaps Sarah didn't want to appear before him. Rahim had to choose suicide in order to atone for her sins. After learning about this past, Rafat decided to save Sarah. He wandered through the house, marking the doorframes of each room, to systematically check for the location of the basement. Unfortunately, he found nothing. Finally, Rafat focused on the stone fountain in the center of the hall. He picked up the axe and chopped open the fountain, which erupted with a spray of blood. At the bottom of the fountain was an entrance leading underground. He descended the stone steps, and discovered the place where Sarah had hidden all those years ago. Moreover, the key and doorknob Rafat found in his dream came from this cell. He dug out Sarah's remains from the dust, and left the basement holding the bones. Unexpectedly, Lifa and the others also arrived. Just as Rafat was about to signal everyone to leave, the main door was unexpectedly bricked up. In an instant, Lifa and the others vanished. Rafat heard Med's screams from upstairs, and rushed up to check. To his surprise, Med was suspended in mid-air, with conical spikes piercing beneath him. As the rope was about to snap, Rafat pushed the wooden bed nearby over, but Med still crashed through the bed's boards. He was impaled by the spikes. Just then, his wife Ayel's cries echoed from downstairs. She saw that the first floor was filled with venomous snakes, and they slithered toward Ayel, flicking their tongues. One bit down on the woman's throat. Before Rafat could react, Lifa was also in peril, falling from the second floor and breaking her neck. In just a matter of minutes, Rafat lost all his loved ones. Just as he was about to end his own life, Maggie arrived just in time to help Rafat see the reality. It turned out that Lifa and the others were not in the mansion at all. Everything that had just happened was an illusion. Someone was trying to drive Rafat to death. Maggie couldn't understand why she still refused to let you go. Even though Sarah's remains have been found, Rafat suddenly realized a possibility. Perhaps Sarah was trying to help him. Just as he finished speaking, the spirit from the bones attached itself to Maggie. Through Maggie, Sarah told Rafat, "I was the one who led you to the cave to find the frankincense. I also made Taha stand by the railing, so you could see that warning of death on the wall." Sarah also freed Rida to save Rafat, and even when the nightmare trapped Rafat in the maze, it was Sarah who guided him to wake up. At this moment, she quietly approached Rafat, and told him that the true culprit wasn't the nightmare demon, but Lucifer. After Sarah spoke the name of the demon, she vanished, leaving this world. Rafat buried her in the yard. Maggie also left Egypt and returned to Scotland. Rafat, now in his 40s, was still unmarried. He didn't understand why Lucifer coveted his mind. Soon, this question had an answer, because Lewis sent a letter, along with a card representing the demon. In the letter, Lewis wrote that he wouldn't send any more mazes. He had grown tired of the game.
Louis هو Lucifer?
Rafat stood on the balcony, filled with questions. And thus, the story of this season came to an end. Thanks to Netflix. It was my first time watching an Egyptian drama. The plot centered around Sarah in the haunted mansion, and branched out into storylines involving mummies and a gorilla, as well as a water ghost. The quality of the first 2 episodes was quite good, full of rich exotic charm. The male lead's inner monologue also had a good dose of dark humor. Unfortunately, the script writing was indeed lacking. It had the vibe of a third-rate supernatural novel. Several subplots were too disjointed and poorly connected. The final twist revealing that Lewis was Lucifer was also unconvincing. The earlier setup only involved him giving the protagonist the maze game, which could be used for tarot readings of the future. Overall, it started strong but fell flat. For the novelty in the Arabic-speaking region, it's worth a watch.